If you're struggling with your shot, well, today we're going to look at how you can get your aim cracked out as fast as possible with the most comprehensive guide covering a ton of different techniques and tips to beam your enemies, so let's get to it. We're going to begin with one of the most impactful aim tips to get a better shot, and it is recoil smoothing. Recoil in Apex can be negated by utilizing horizontal movement. Obviously, this has limits, but if you shoot from side to side, you can see that you don't have to worry much about your vertical recoil, if at all. This has been around for a while, but the way you can utilize this on actual enemies who are not moving as much is by strafing from side to side while you are also moving your aim in the opposite direction. So if I strafe to the right, I'm going to start to move my aim to the left, letting me stay on target and minimize my recoil with the recoil smoothing. If enemies are moving, this is much easier. You want to move in the opposite direction of them. This will give you a very strong recoil smoothing pattern. This will only work up to a certain range, as enemies who are further away won't be visually moving as much on your screen, but this can be an incredible technique to beam enemies with most assault rifles, as this technique excels at mid-range. If you struggle with recoil smoothing, it's very likely our next tip will help quite a bit, and it is the importance of your crosshair placement and whether you should be aiming at the head or the body. Starting with the head versus body, we can use this comparison on screen to show the difference between an enemy crouching at 10 meters, 50 meters, and 100 meters, and you'll notice you barely need to adjust your aim at the further ranges. When you are at this longer range, it is almost always better to aim for that neck or head area with tap firing weapons, and if you struggle with recoil control, the waist or chest is going to be better for more consistency with auto guns. At closer ranges, this does change quite a bit, since enemies who are crouching in and out of fights while also strafing can be harder to hit. The upper chest will provide the best results here, as you can still hit them in the head if they crouch. Remember, it's all about your perspective in relation to the enemy, and your strategy will want to change depending on the range you are from them. As for general crosshair placement though, it kind of comes down to seeing the future, being able to understand and predict where players are going to come from, and putting your reticle in the perfect spot ahead of time is going to be key. This could be on a ledge someone will climb up on, or just a corner where someone will be peeking from. Keeping your reticle at that chest level is going to always give you that easy advantage though. When you are in a close range fight, it can sometimes be great to pre-fire enemies who are about to come around a corner or a doorway, but when do you do this and how do you pre-fire effectively? For one, the easiest pre-fire you can do is when enemies are re-peeking the same side multiple times in a row. This is something any experienced player will not do, but generally a less skilled player will peek out the same side or ego chow, and you can send out shots before they even step out. It's only a fraction of a second advantage, but it's no joke, and it will give you a massive leg up, as they're going to take damage before they really even see you. Second to this is pre-firing enemies who are about to walk through a door, or pre-fire some abilities like a catalyst wall. This can be nice if you are fortunate enough to connect some shots before an enemy does peek. Most guns can be pre-fired, but the Havoc in particular is one that you will want to utilize more pre-firing, as a no turbo Havoc can lower your TTK substantially if you aren't really being on point. Surprisingly, sometimes your aim might be off simply if your first shot is not on your target. Your first shot in every engagement or spray needs to be emphasized. If you start your spray off and your first shot is not on your target, this can lead to overcorrecting and additional misses. Not to mention, there really is no reason to miss that first round you fire. Also, wasting a few shots right off the bat massively increases the chance that you are going to have to reload before finishing an enemy, and this dramatically increases your TTK and pretty much pulls you out of any sort of competitive one-on-one. Does crouch spamming in fights actually work to help you win more engagements? Well, beyond your aim, kind of. Spamming crouches as fast as possible is not going to do anything other than make you kind of look like a fool. However, if you can learn to intermittently crouch, this has benefits beyond just making you harder to hit. As we learned earlier, if you crouch in a close range fight, it can actually make enemies miss shots above you. What we did not discuss though is crouching does help you hit your shots, because the outer edge of your hip fire or your spread will be more accurate, as crouching does decrease your spread, as you can see on screen. So if you can, and if you are very close to enemies, crouching every now and then and not spamming it is useful for these multiple reasons. So when do you utilize hip firing, and when do you utilize aiming down sights? Well, it kind of depends, but in general, almost anyone inside 7 to 10 meters can be hip fired depending on your weapon, sometimes further than this. There is a big tip to help you get better hip fire accuracy though, and it is known as the ADS hip fire spread tactic. When you go from aiming down sights to a state of hip fire or rest, you actually have a gradual transition in your accuracy, so you can aim down sights on an enemy, then release, keeping your shot still pretty accurate accurate. This can be great if you're in a multi-enemy fight and you need better accuracy, but also still need to be extremely mobile, as your strafing speed when not aiming down sights is much better. You can then get some pretty good beams and still be very elusive. Practice this in the firing range to get the timing and overall consistency down. We already discussed first shot importance, but I do want to give a general overview, suggestion, and kind of a notice as to what firing too early can do. If you start a gunfight off from a range that is not optimal, you will be hurting your chances and accuracy, and you might not even realize it. If you can, you want to wait till you are inside the optimal range for the weapon that you are using. You're not only going to have better aim, you will be able to get the drop on an enemy. This in particular can be helpful if you are walking up on an enemy stealthily and they do not know you are there. Do not fire too early, alerting them and letting them get away when you could get a free knock if you just got a few meters closer. It's very weapon dependent, but my general overview of the suggested ranges for every weapon is on screen. Know that this is just a baseline overview, and your skill level can either decrease this range or increase this range if you are a little bit better. In tandem with shooting too early, we have the tip of just waiting for enemies to be less mobile. You'll notice a trend with this video. It's not as much about being insane with your aim. This comes in time, but it's almost more about minimizing your mistakes. If you fire at enemies who are mid-ability or jumping or sliding down from height, you don't want to panic and waste shots on them if you can help it. Give yourself the best opportunity to get an accurate shot, and a big one is horizons who are sliding out of a lift. Wait for them to be out of that lift and near you before you do fire. Also, as a pathfinder who is grappling towards you or even away from you, it might be best to wait till they finish that grapple, as this is when they will be less mobile and you can take advantage of this perfect timing. Similarly with anyone launching on an octane pad, wasting even like 5 shots of a mag on an enemy when they do have extreme movement can result in a death, because you won't be able to finish them without reloading. Your shot or decision making matters even before you do shoot that first round. If you want to see a new movement guide for myself and be able to evade enemy fire a little bit better, drop a like on this video and let me know down below. We already spoke on crosshair placement, but it's also worth mentioning that target centering is critical for a handful of weapons. While hitting someone in the side or the chest or the arms is fine, you are connecting shots. The slight inaccuracy will be amplified when you are using shotguns. Having a keen eye to track that dead center of an enemy's mass is important, and it's going to help you minimize small misses when you do track someone who is strafing, as they will start to move in the opposite direction. If you're not right on the center, you might miss a few shots. If you are looking for specific ways to improve, there's a lot you can do and actually implement, and it's been said before, but it needs to be said again. The firing range is so important, especially for newer or less experienced players. The obvious is that you will be able to learn recoil, but if you spend 5 minutes in the firing range shooting guns, this could literally equal hours and hours of battle royale time to get the same amount of experience shooting that weapon. Lots of people kind of just spray and hold down the trigger, hoping for the best, but the better you can feel, look, and understand how that recoil goes, the better control you will have. This is also where you can actually implement everything that we have talked about. If you want my 5-minute training routine, I spend a couple minutes tap firing the signs and the dummies. This gets my target acquisition down. I then spray the bots via hipfire to get tracking down, and then I'll do a mix of this for a few more minutes. This is really all you need to do, and it will make a huge difference. If you want to take this one step further, try to use weapons that you are struggling with or the weapons that you want to use on that day. And an additional tip is to practice spraying weapons in bursts. Practicing this way will help you gradually learn the recoil of the weapon that you are trying to use, rather than trying to get everything down at once. Start with spraying 5 rounds, then 10, and after a little bit do 15, and then 20, and so on. Doing this will drastically make Apex feel more approachable, and you'll learn how to control weapons in no time. If you are looking to go even further again, and you want to take it even more seriously, you need to utilize the mixtape playlist. This playlist changes over time, but for the most part, if you can play Control or Team Deathmatch, this is so good to help you get more practice on real enemies. It's also a no stress environment, since you can simply just respawn and have another go. I try to do about an hour or so a week of mixtape, but truthfully, I don't think there's any limit on how much you do here. More is better. It's pretty OP. There's a few things with your aim that might be throwing you off outside of just your raw practice and capabilities. The obvious is your sensitivity. If your sense is too high and you are struggling, try lowering it. For controller players, somewhere around 4.4 linear or 4.4 classic is an incredible starting point. There is no setting solution that is going to change you from being a bot to being incredible instantly, but know that being comfortable is very important, and not using anything that is too slow or too fast is key. One setting that you should take a look at is your dead zones. If you can, having no dead zone on your look controls is going to net you much better results, as you have full control over your aim. You might have a small small amount of stick drift if you are a controller player, or aim drift, but to be honest, this is okay, and if anything, it's going to make it easier to stay on target. If your stick drift is really bad though, then small dead zones are okay. If you need to do large dead zones though, I think you probably should just look at getting a new controller, unfortunately. Sticking with settings, one thing that is often overlooked is going to be per optic settings. This is not a requirement, but if you do not have these set up the right way, this can be a throw. You'll want to find ones that are comfortable. Again, mine are on screen as a 4:3 classic player. Note that you don't need to put too much emphasis into the higher optic settings, as 6 times, 8 times, and 10 times optics I find are rarely used and honestly pretty unnecessary. Usually you don't need more range than what a 2 to 4 can provide. A big thing with aim is going to be your hardware. This is crazy important. Your controller or mouse and keyboard is literally what you touch. It's what connects you to the screen in the game. You don't need a $200 pro controller, but a decent one is a must. Similarly, you don't need paddles, but keep an eye on your stick drift. I'm less qualified to talk about this, but mouse pads are also pretty important, and I generally find that lighter mice to be better, as you need less force to move them. I do have a few controllers linked in this video that I personally have used and tested, as about a year or two ago, I went through a dozen controllers, tried them all out, was trying to figure out what the best ones are, and these are the ones I kind of landed on. All of these do work well though, and some of them, like the Power A controller, provides a ton of features and it's not too expensive when it comes to paddled controllers. Drop a comment down below with the controller or mouse you are using though, as I would love to hear what equipment people are using and try it out myself. Likewise with your input device, your screen, TV, or monitor is also very important. There may not be a lot you can do with this because obviously these are more expensive, but at least identifying a potential weak point in your game is the point of this video. You do not need to wail out on a 4K 240 Hz OLED monitor, but playing on a high input lag TV, usually larger TVs or older TVs, can be a huge issue that you might not be aware of. And again, it's more of a PSA to understand that this could be giving you additional troubles. Although I will say I rarely find that this is the sole reason for poor aim in FPS, as you can kind of get used to anything. I suggest you look up your TV or monitor model and make sure you aren't playing on something that has a very high input lag, as this will slow you down and it's gonna make you kind of feel like you are moving through butter with your aim. My recommended gaming monitors and the ones I use are below as well. Back to some in-game tips. What weapons you are using is important. While we have certain guns that are meta, like the Hemlock, Nemesis, Havoc, and Flatline, at least as of the posting of this video, it's not necessarily what will work best for you. You'll eventually be forced to use the meta guns if you want to compete at the top of the meta, but if you struggle with aim, something like an R301 or Volt might be a great starting point, as the feel of these guns I find to be great for most users, as they are easier. An example of this is I have a friend who hates using Flatline but loves the R301, so generally they stick with using this gun as it is mostly viable even if it is not as strong as a Flatline. Just know that you can't always get that optimal loadout, so getting proficient with all the weapons is going to be a must at some point. Our next tip is pretty niche and weapon dependent, but one thing I do want to mention is that many weapons in Apex Legends actually get easier the longer you hold down the trigger. Many weapons have an extreme amount of kick early on or in the middle of their magazine, so if you can, holding down the trigger and emptying your magazine may lend you to getting better results than trying to fire a dozen rounds at a time and then stopping and repeating that recoil pattern. Not necessarily something that will help you in game, but it's absolutely something that you should know. Our next set of tips has to do with Apex's less typical weapons, burst and semi-auto or tap fire guns. Let's start with probably the least favorite for many, and it is burst weapons. Burst weapons have a big advantage of being able to deal quick damage to enemies, but they massively prioritize being accurate. Burst firing also requires you to be closer to enemies than say a marksman or tap firing weapon, and if you can't get your first shot on point, you're gonna more than likely miss out on the entire burst. The big benefit of burst weapons though is the recoil is generally easier to control, as you are forced to wait a brief millisecond between shots, so if you do struggle with your aim, you might want to try something out like the Hemlock, the Nemesis, or the Prowler. For tap firing weapons, aiming down sights all comes to the steady hand, and in general, tap firing is only viable at longer ranges and it should be utilized for those who like to play a little bit slower in ranked or those who want to farm higher damage games. When it comes to tips to how to use snipers and marksman weapons, I find having patience goes a long way. Don't just spam that trigger trigger, trying to shoot those G7 shots as fast as you can, slow things down, and make sure your shot really counts. Sometimes your shot in Apex, and more specifically your aim, can come down to your mental thought process. Many different things work for many people, but for me, if you can change how you think about your recoil, this actually might be all you need to unlock another level of play. Try to think about recoil in the following way, where your horizontal movement, such as strafing left and right, can be great to control the horizontal bounces from left and right, whereas your looking vertical and up and down will be for the vertical recoil control. If you combine these two fundamental basic thought processes and you mix in recoil smoothing, this can be really great to help you control recoil and pretty much negate all of that recoil in your guns. Everyone wants a larger field of view, like anything over a 100, but if you are struggling with hitting and even seeing your targets, you may want to try lowering your FOV. I wouldn't go under 90, but decreasing your field of view will make enemies bigger as it zooms you in, and thus you might feel like it is easier to hit your shots. Some pros even have been known to play on 90 FOV, so it definitely works, but I find that I miss out on some of the additional awareness that is going to be around you when you are punched in. So I generally recommend that you do try to stick right around 100, as it is the sweet spot for me. When it comes to your aim in Apex, there really is nothing more important. No movement, no legend, and no outside source that is going to help you truly become better. At a certain point, you just got to put the hours in. If you are still here, drop a like and comment down below with your biggest struggle in Apex, and I'll try to help you out. Till next time, happy gaming, legends.